Left your party at sundown. You were nowhere to be found. Sipped my bottle, heading uptown. Ooh, long way home, the back roads. No hands on the handle. Blew the red light like a candle. The wind undid my hair like it knew you weren't there. Boys like you never play fair. Don't play fair. I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. City has no secrets. I know all the shortcuts. Now I'm lost looking for your touch. Used to be your night shift. Can't work out, I might just lie down here until the sun lifts. Found an empty street, sing myself a melody about how it used to be. The wind undid my hair like it knew you weren't there. Boys like you never play fair. I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. I'm gone, I'm gone. I'm gone away. I'm gone, I'm gone, I'm gone away. The moon lights up my sundress, reminds me to forget. The moon lights up my sundress, shows what lies ahead, ahead. I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. Lights up my sundress, reminds me to forget. Lights up my sundress, shows what lies ahead, ahead. You have habits just like me. Talk too much with strangers. Get way too serious around family. And I don't have any wishes, but when I kiss you, our lips fit well. And I don't have expectations, but when I daydream, I fall asleep. And our hands melt. It started out as teasing, but I had deeper meaning when I touched your chest. Now I don't When you need it most, feel the freedom of being careless, just being in love. Everything will be alright through the darkness, through the night. No fear anymore. No fear anymore. No fear anymore. Why the smile on your face? Don't fake it. You don't have to pretend. Why the fear in your eyes will make it? Just take a chance. The thing that haunts you, leave it behind you. The ones that love you, let them guide you. Everything will be alright through the darkness, through the night. No fear anymore. No fear anymore. No fear anymore. Left your party at sundown. You were nowhere to be found. Sipped my bottle, heading uptown. Ooh, long way home, the back roads. No hands on the handle. Blew the red light like a candle. The wind undid my hair like it knew you weren't there. Boys like you never play fair. Don't play fair. I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride. There's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. City has no secrets. I know all the shortcuts. Now I'm lost looking for your touch. Used to be your night shift. Can't work out, I might just fly down here until the sun lifts. Found an empty streets, sing myself a melody about how it used to be. Wind undid my hair like it knew you weren't there. Boys like you never play fair. I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. I'm gone, I'm gone, I'm gone away. I'm gone, I'm gone, I'm gone away. The moon lights up my sundress, reminds me to forget. The moon lights up my sundress, shows what lies ahead, ahead. I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. How could you think we could just be friends again? I'm on a midnight bike ride, there's orders 2 a.m. Left you behind. Now that you know things can never be the same. Lights up my sundress, reminds me to forget. Lights up my sundress, shows what lies ahead, ahead. You have habits just like me. Talk too much with strangers. Get way too serious around family. And I don't have any wishes, but when I kiss you, our lips fit well. And I don't have expectations.
Hello, happy Friday. I hope you're all having a good night or a Saturday morning. Whatever time of the day it is or nighttime, I hope that it's treating you well and that you are safe and that you are healthy. Nevertheless, thank you for being here. You will have to let me know if the background sounds are too loud. I know last time we had to turn them down a bit because it was drowning everything else out. So tonight we are going to read just whatever Lovecraft stories I happen to land on. So first we will be reading The Nameless City. When I drew nigh the nameless city, I knew it was accursed. I was traveling in a parched and terrible valley under the moon, and afar I saw it protruding uncannily above the sands as part of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave. Fear spoke from the age-worn stones of this hoary survivor of the deluge, this great-grandmother of the eldest pyramid. And a viewless aura repelled me and bade me retreat from antique and sinister secrets that no man should see, and no man else had dared to see. Remote in the desert of Araby lies the nameless city, crumbling and inarticulate, its low walls nearly hidden by the sands of uncounted ages. It must have been thus before the first stones of Memphis were laid, and while the bricks of Babylon were yet unbaked. There is no legend so old as to give it a name, or to recall that it was ever alive. But it is told of in whispers around campfires, and muttered about by grandams in the tents of sheikhs, and so that all the tribes shun it without wholly knowing why. It was of this place that Abdul Aharez, the mad poet, dreamed on the night before he sang his unexplained couplet. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. I should have known that the Arabs had good reason for shunning the nameless city, the city told of in strange tales, but seen by no living man. Yet I defied them and went into the untrodden waste with my camel. I alone have seen it, and that is why no other face bears such hideous lines of fear as mine. Why no other man shivers so horribly when the night wind rattles the windows. When I came upon it in the ghastly stillness of unending sleep, it looked at me, chilly from the rays of a cold moon amidst the desert's heat. And as I returned its look, I forgot my triumph at finding it, and stopped still with my camel to wait for the dawn. For hours I waited, till the east grew gray and the stars faded, and the gray turned to roseal light edged with gold. I heard a moaning and saw a storm of sand stirring among the antique stones, though the sky was clear and the vast reaches of desert still. Then suddenly above the desert's far rim came the blazing edge of the sun, seen through the tiny sandstorm which was passing away, and in my fevered state I fancied that from some remote depth there came a crash of musical metal to hail the fiery disk, as Neman hails it from the banks of the Nile. My ears rang, and my imagination seethed as I led my camel slowly across the sand to that unvocal stone place. That place too old for Egypt and Meroe to remember. That place which I alone of living men had seen. In and out amongst the shapeless foundations of houses and places I wandered, finding never a carving or inscription to tell of these men, if men they were, who built this city and dwelt therein so long ago. The antiquity of the spot was unwholesome, and I longed to encounter some sign or device to prove that the city was indeed fashioned by mankind. There were certain proportions and dimensions in the ruins which I did not like. I had with me many tools, and dug much within the walls of the obliterated edifices, but progress was slow, and nothing significant was revealed. When night and the moon returned, I felt a chill wind which brought new fear, so that I did not dare to remain in the city. And as I went outside the antique walls to sleep, a small sighing sandstorm gathered behind me, blowing over the gray stones, though the moon was bright and most of the desert still. I awakened just at dawn from a pageant of horrible dreams, my ears ringing as from some metallic peal. I saw the sun peering redly through the last gusts of a little sandstorm that hovered over the nameless city, and marked the quietness of the rest of the landscape. Once more I ventured within those brooding ruins that swelled beneath the sand like an ogre under a coverlet, and again dug vainly for relics of the forgotten race. At noon I rested, and in the afternoon I spent much time tracing the walls and bygone streets, and at the outlines of the nearly vanished buildings. I saw that the city had been mighty indeed, and wondered at the sources of its greatness. To myself I pictured all the splendors of an age so distant that Shalandea could not recall it, and thought of Sarnath the Doomed, that stood in the land of Nar when mankind was young, and of Ib, that was carven of gray stone before mankind existed. All at once I came upon a place where the bedrock rose stark through the sand and formed a low cliff. And here I saw with joy what seemed to promise further traces of the antediluvian people. Hewn rudely on the face of the cliff were the unmistakable facades of several small, squat rock houses or temples, whose interiors might preserve many secrets of ages too remote for calculation, though sandstorms had long since effaced any carvings which may have been outside. Very low and sand-choked were all the dark apertures near me, but I cleared on with my spade and crawled through it, carrying a torch to reveal whatever mysteries it might hold. When I was inside, I saw that the cavern was indeed a temple, and beheld plain signs of the race that had lived and worshipped before the desert was a desert. Primitive altars, pillars, and niches, all curiously low, were not absent, and though I saw no sculptures nor frescoes, there were many singular stones clearly shaped into symbols by artificial means. The lowness of the chiseled chamber was very strange, for I could hardly more than kneel upright, but the area was so great that my torch showed only part of it at a time. I shuddered oddly in some of the far corners, for certain altars and stones suggested forgotten rites of terrible, revolting, and inexplicable nature, and made me wonder what manner of men could have made and frequented such a temple. When I had seen all that the place contained, I crawled out again, avid to find what the temples might yield. Night had now approached, yet the tangible things I had seen made curiosity stronger than fear, so that I did not flee from the long moon-cast shadows that had daunted me when first I saw the nameless city. In the twilight I cleared another aperture, and with a new torch crawled into it, finding more vague stones and symbols, though nothing more definite than the other temple had contained. The room was just as low, but much less broad, ending in a very narrow passage crowded with obscure and cryptical shrines. About these shrines I was prying when the noise of a wind and my camel outside broke through the stillness and drew me forth to see what could have frightened the beast. The moon was gleaming vividly over the primeval ruins, lighting a dense cloud of sand that seemed blown by a strong but decreasing wind from some point along the cliff ahead of me. I knew it was this chilly, sandy wind which had disturbed the camel. I was about to lead him to a place of better shelter when I chanced to glance up and saw that there was no wind atop the cliff. This astonished me and made me fearful again, but I immediately recalled the sudden local winds I had seen and heard before at sunrise and sunset, and judged it was a normal thing. I decided that it came from some rock fissure leading to a cave, and watched the troubled sand to trace it to its source, soon perceiving that it came from the black orifice of a temple a long distance south of me, almost out of sight. Against the choking sand cloud I plodded towards this temple, which as I neared it loomed larger than the rest, and showed a doorway far less clogged with caked sand. I would not have entered had not the terrific force of the icy wind almost quenched my torch. It poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it ruffled the sand and spread among the weird ruins. Soon it grew fainter, and the sand grew more and more still, till finally all was at rest again. But a presence seemed stalking among the spectral stones of the city, and when I glanced at the moon it seemed to quiver as though mirrored in unquiet waters. I was more afraid than I could explain, but not enough to dull my thirst for wonder. So as soon as the wind was quite gone, I crossed into the dark chamber from which it had come. This temple, as I had fancied from the outside, was larger than either of those I had visited before, and was presumably a natural cavern, since it bore winds from some region beyond. Here I could stand quite upright, but saw that the stones and altars were as low as those in the other temples. On the walls and roofs I beheld for the first time some traces of the pictorial art of the ancient race, curious curling streaks of paint that had almost faded or crumbled away. And on 2 of the altars I saw with rising excitement a maze of well-fashioned curvilinear carvings. As I held my torch aloft, it seemed to me that the shape of the roof was too regular to be natural, and I wondered what the prehistoric cutters of stone had first worked upon. Their engineering skills must have been vast. Then a brighter flare of the fantastic flame showed me that for which I had been seeking, the opening to those remoter abysses whence the sudden wind had blown. And I grew faint when I saw that it was a small and plainly artificial door, chiseled in the solid rock. I thrust my torch within, beholding a black tunnel, with the roof arching low over a rough flight of very small, numerous, and steeply descending steps. I shall always see those steps in my dreams, for I came to learn what they meant. At the time I hardly knew whether to call them steps or merely footholds in a precipitous desert. My mind was whirling with mad thoughts, and the words and warning of Arab prophets seemed to drift across the desert from the lands that men know to the nameless city that men dare not know. Yet I hesitated only for a moment before advancing through the portal and commencing to climb cautiously down the steep passage, feet first, as though on a ladder. It is only in the terrible phantasms of drugs or delirium that any other man can have such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths towards which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours, and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must be traversing. There were changes of direction and of steepness, and once I came to a long, low, level passage where I had to wriggle feet first along the rocky floor, holding my torch at arm's length beyond my head. The place was not high enough for kneeling. After that were more of the steep steps, and I was still scrambling down interminably when my failing torch died out. I do not think I noticed it at the time, for when I did notice it, I was still holding it high above me, as if it were ablaze. I was quite unbalanced with that instinct for the strange and the unknown, which had made me a wanderer upon earth and a haunter of far, ancient, and forbidden places. In the darkness there flashed before my mind fragments of my cherished treasury of demonic lore. Sentences from Al-Hazred, the Mad Arab, paragraphs from the apocryphal nightmares of Damascus, and infamous lines from the delirious Images du Monde of Gauthier de Metz. I repeated queer extracts and muttered of Afrasiab and the daemons that floated with him down the Oxus, later chanting over and over again a phrase from one of Lord Dunsany's tables: the unreverberate blackness of the abyss. Once, when the descent grew amazingly steep, I recited something in sing-song from Thomas Moore until I feared to recite it more. A reservoir of darkness black, as witches' cauldrons are when filled with moon drugs in the eclipse distilled. Leaning to look if foot might pass down through that chasm, I saw beneath, as far as vision could explore, the jetty sides as smooth as glass, looking as if just varnished o'er. With that dark pitch the seat of death throws out upon its slimy shore. Time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt a level floor, and I found myself in a place slightly higher than the rooms in the 2 smaller temples now so incalculably far above my head. I could not quite stand, but could kneel upright, and in the dark I shuffled and crept hither and thither at random. I soon knew that I was in a narrow passage whose walls were lined with cases of wood having glass fronts. As in the Paleozoic and abysmal place I felt of such things as polished wood and glass, I shuddered at the possible implications. The cases were apparently ranged along each side of the passage at regular intervals, and were oblong and horizontal, hideously like coffins in shape and size. When I tried to move 2 or 3 for further examination, I found that they were firmly fastened. I saw that the passage was a long one, so floundered ahead rapidly, in a creeping run that would have seemed horrible had any eye watched me in the blackness. Crossing from side to side occasionally to feel of my surroundings, and be sure the walls and rows of cases still stretched on. Man is so used to thinking visually that I almost forgot the darkness and pictured the endless corridor of wood and glass in its low-studded monotony as though I saw it. And then in a moment of indescribable emotion, I did see it. Just when my fancy merged into real sight, I cannot tell. But there came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew that I saw the dim outlines of a corridor, and the cases revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. For a little while all was exactly as I had imagined it, since the glow was very faint. But as I mechanically kept on stumbling ahead into the stronger light, I realized that my fancy had been but feeble. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural painting whose lines and colors were beyond description. The cases were of a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and containing the mummified forms of creatures outreaching in grotesqueness the most chaotic dreams of man. To convey any idea of these monstrosities is impossible. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting sometimes the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or the paleontologist ever heard. In size they approximated a small man, and their forelegs bore delicate and evidently flexible feet, curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. To nothing can such things be well compared. In one flash I thought of comparisons as varied as the cat, the bullfrog, the mythic satyr, and the human being. Not Jove himself had had so colossal and protuberant a forehead, yet the horns and the noselessness and the alligator-like jaw placed the things outside all established categories. I debated for a time on the reality of the mummies, half suspecting they were artificial idols, but soon decided they were indeed some Paleogean species which had lived when the nameless city was alive. To crown their grotesqueness, most of them were gorgeously enrobed in the costliest of fabrics, and lavishly laden with ornaments of gold, jewel, and unknown shining metals. The importance of these crawling creatures must have been vast, for they held first place among the wild designs on the frescoed walls and ceiling. With matchless skill had the artists drawn them in a world of their own, wherein they had cities and gardens fashioned to suit their dimensions, and I could not help but think that their pictured history was allegorical, perhaps showing the progress of the race that worshipped them. These creatures, I said to myself, were to men of the nameless city what the she-wolf was to Rome, or some totem beast is to a tribe of Indians. Holding this view, I could trace roughly a wonderful epic of the nameless city, the tale of a mighty seacoast metropolis that ruled the world before Africa rose out of the waves, and of its struggles as the sea shrank away, and the desert crept into the fertile valley that held it. I saw its wars and triumphs, its troubles and defeats, and afterwards its terrible fight against the desert when thousands of its people, here represented in allegory by the grotesque reptiles, were driven to chisel their way down through the rocks in some marvelous manner to another world whereof their prophets were told them. It was all vividly weird and realistic, and its connection with the awesome descent I had made was unmistakable. I even recognized the passages. As I crept along the corridor toward the brighter light, I saw later stages of the painted epic, the leave-taking of the race that had dwelt in the nameless city and the valley around for 10 million years. The race whose souls shrank from quitting scenes. Their bodies had known so long, where they had settled as nomads in the earth's youth, hewing in the virgin rock those primal shrines at which they had never ceased to worship. Now that the light was better, I studied the pictures more closely, and remembering that the strange reptiles must represent the unknown men, pondered upon the customs of the nameless city. Many things were peculiar and inexplicable. The civilization, which included a written alphabet, had seemingly risen to a higher order than those immeasurably later civilizations of Egypt and Chaldea, yet there were curious omissions. I could, for example, find no pictures to represent deaths or funeral customs, save such as were related to wars, violence, and plagues. And I wondered at the reticence shown concerning natural death. It was as though an idea of earthly immortality had been fostered as a cheering illusion. Still near the end of the passage was painted scenes of utmost picturesqueness and extravagance. Contrasted views of the nameless city in its desertion and growing ruin, and of the strange new realm of paradise to which the race had hewn its way through the stone. In these views, the city and the desert valley were shown always by moonlight, a golden nimbus hovering over the fallen walls, and half revealing the splendid perfection of former times, hewn spectrally and elusively by the artist. The paradisal scenes were almost too extravagant to be believed, portraying a hidden world of eternal day, filled with glorious cities. At the very last, I thought I saw signs of an artistic anticlimax. The paintings were less skillful and much more bizarre than even the wildest of the earlier scenes. They seemed to record a slow decadence of the ancient stock, coupled with a growing ferocity towards the outside world from which it was driven by the desert. The forms of the people, always represented by the sacred reptiles, appeared to be gradually wasting away, though their spirit was shown hovering above the ruins by moonlight gained in proportion. Emaciated priests, displayed as reptiles in ornate robes, cursed the upper air and all who breathed it. One terrible final scene showed a primitive-looking man, perhaps a pioneer of ancient Iram, the city of pillars, torn to pieces by members of the elder race. I remember how the Arabs fear the nameless city, and was glad that beyond this place the gray walls and ceiling were bare. As I viewed the pageant of mural history, I had approached very closely to the end of the low-ceiled hall, and was aware of a great gate through which came all the illuminating phosphorescence. Creeping up to it, I cried aloud in transcendent amazement at what lay beyond. For instead of other and brighter chambers, there were only an illimitable void of uniform radiance, such one might fancy when gazing down from the peak of Mount Everest upon a sea of sunlit mist. Behind me was a passage so cramped that I could not stand upright in it. Before me was an infinity of subterranean effulgence. Reaching down from the passage into the abyss was the head of a steep flight of steps. Small, numerous steps like those of black passages I had traversed, but after a few feet, the glowing vapors concealed everything. Swung back open against the left-hand wall of the passage was a massive door of brass, incredibly thick and decorated with fantastical bas-reliefs, which could, if closed, shut the whole inner world of light away from the vaults and passages of rock. I looked at the steps, and for the nonce dared not try them. I touched the open brass door and could not move it. Then I sank prone to the stone floor, my mind aflame with prodigious reflections which could not even a death-like exhaustion banish. As I lay still with closed eyes, free to ponder, many things I had noted in the frescoes came back to me with new and terrible significance. Scenes representing the nameless city in its heyday, the vegetation of the valley around it, and the distant lands with which its merchants traded. The allegory of the crawling creatures puzzled me by its universal prominence, and I wondered that it should be so closely followed in a pictured history of such importance. In the frescoes, the nameless city had been shown in proportions fitting to the reptiles. I wondered what its real proportions and magnificence had been, and reflected a moment on certain oddities I had noticed in the ruins. I thought curiously of the lowness of the primal temples, and of the underground corridor, which were doubtless hewn thus out of deference to the reptile deities there honored, though it perforce reduced the worshippers to crawling. Perhaps the very rites here involved crawling in imitation of the creatures. No religious theory, however, could easily explain why the level passages in that awesome descent should be as low as the temples, or even lower, since one could not even kneel in it. As I thought of the crawling creatures, whose hideous mummified forms were so close to me, I felt a new throb of fear. Mental associations are curious, and I shrank from the idea that except for the poor primitive man torn to pieces in the last painting, mine was the only human form amidst the many relics and symbols of the primordial life. But as always in my strange and roving existence, wonder soon drove out fear, for the luminous abyss and what it might contain presented a problem worthy of the greatest explorer. That a weird world of mystery lay far down that flight of peculiarly small steps, I could not doubt, and I hoped to find there those human memorials which the painted corridor had failed to give. The frescoes had pictured unbelievable cities and valleys in this lower realm, and my fancy dwelt on the rich and colossal ruins that awaited me. My fears, indeed, concerned the past rather than the future. Not even the physical horror of my position in that cramped corridor of dead reptiles and antediluvian frescoes, miles below the world I knew, and faced by another world of eerie light and mist, could match the lethal dread I felt at the abysmal antiquity of the scene and its soul. An ancientness so vast that measurement is feeble seemed to leer down from the primal stones and rock-hewn temples of the nameless city, while the very latest of the astounding maps in the frescoes showed oceans and continents that man has forgotten, with only here and there some vaguely familiar outlines. Of what could have happened in the geological ages since the painting ceased and the death-hating race descentfully succumbed to decay, no man might say. Life had once teemed in these caverns and in the luminous realm beyond. Now I was alone with vivid relics, and I trembled to think of the countless ages through which these relics had kept a silent, deserted vigil. Suddenly there came another burst of that acute fear which had intermittently seized me ever since I first saw the terrible valley and the nameless city under a cold moon, and despite my exhaustion, I found myself starting frantically to a sitting posture and gazing back along the black corridor toward the tunnels that rose to the outer world. My sensations were much like those which had made me shun the nameless city at night, and were as inexplicable as they were poignant. In another moment, however, I received a still greater shock in the form of a definite sound, the first which had broken the utter silence of these tomb-like depths. It was a deep, low moaning, as of a distant throng of condemned spirits, and came from the direction in which I was staring. Its volume rapidly grew, till it soon reverberated rightfully through the low passage, and at the same time I became conscious of an increasing draught of cold air, likewise flowing from the tunnels and the city above. The touch of this air seemed to restore my balance, for I instantly recalled the sudden gusts which had risen around the mouth of the abyss each sunset and sunrise, one of which had indeed revealed the hidden tunnels to me. I looked at my watch and saw that sunrise was near, so bracing myself to resist the gale that was sweeping down to its cavern home as it had swept forth at evening, my fear again waned low, since a natural phenomenon tends to dispel broodings over the unknown. More and more madly poured the shrieking, moaning night wind into the gulf of the inner earth. I dropped prone again and clutched vainly at the floor for fear of being swept bodily through the open gate into the phosphorescent abyss. Such fury I had not expected, and as I grew aware of an actual slipping of my form towards the abyss, I was beset by 1,000 new terrors of apprehension and imagination. The malignancy of the blast awakened incredible fancies. Once more I compared myself shudderingly to the only human image in that frightful corridor, the man who was torn to pieces by the nameless race. For in the fiendish clawing of the swirling currents there seemed to abide a vindictive rage, all the stronger because it was largely impotent. I think I screamed frantically near the last. I was almost mad, but if I did so, my cries were lost in the hell-born babble of the howling wind wraiths. I tried to crawl against the murderous invisible torrent, but I could not even hold my own as I was pushed slowly and inexorably downward towards the unknown world. Finally, reason must have wholly snapped, for I fell babbling over and over that unexplainable couplet of the mad Arab Alharazed, who dreamed of the nameless city. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. Only the grim brooding desert gods know what really took place, what indescribable struggles and scrambles in the dark I endured, or what Abaddon guided me back to life, where I must always remember and shiver in the night wind till oblivion, or worse, claims me. Monstrous and natural colossus was the thing, too far beyond all the ideas of man to be believed except in the silent, damnable small hours of the morning when one cannot sleep. I have said that the fury of the rushing blast was infernal, and that its voices were hideous with the pent-up viciousness of desolate entities. Presently these voices, while still chaotic before me, seemed to my beating brain to take articulate form behind me, and down there in the grave of unnumbered aeon-dead antiquities, leagues below the dawn-lit world of men, I heard the ghastly cursing and snarling of strange-tongued fiends. Turning, I saw outlined against the luminous aether of the abyss what could not be seen against the dusk of the corridor. A nightmare horde of rushing devils, hate-distorted, grotesquely panoplied, half-transparent, devils of a race no man might mistake, the crawling reptiles of the nameless city. And as the wind died away, I was plunged into the ghoul-pooled darkness of earth's bowels, for behind the last of the creatures, the great brazen door clanged shut with a deafening peal of metallic music, whose reverberations swelled out to the distant world to hail the rising sun as Neman hails it from the banks of the Nile. And that is the end of The Nameless City. I'm starting to be less and less of a fan of Lovecraft and his endings. Hello Zoiku, how are you? I hope that you are doing well tonight. We are reading the random Lovecraft stories. Zoiku, thank you for the biddies. Very much appreciate it. It's very sweet of you. How are you doing, friend? That's good. I'm not bad. I'm not entirely sure what I am doing. I got my screens all mixed up. Not that it takes much to confuse me. It's hard to believe it's May already. Working from home has screwed with my sense of time horribly. So I don't even know what day it is. It's very sad. We will go on to another story. I should change the string tags to reading. Because you know me, pro streamer. Also can't spell. There we go. No, need. So we will read another Lovecraft story, and well, downside of reading off a Kindle, you can touch it with your finger and our space is gone. So the next story is called The Festival. I was far from home, and the spell of the eastern sea was upon me. In the twilight I heard it pounding on the rocks, and I knew it lay just over the hill where the twisting willows ripe against the clearing sky and the first stars of evening. And because my fathers had called me to the old town beyond, I pushed on through the shallow, new-fallen snow along the road that soared lonely up to where Aldebaran twinkled among the trees. On toward the very ancient town I had never seen, but often dreamed of. It was the Yuletide that men call Christmas, though they know in their hearts it is older than Bethlehem and Babylon, older than Memphis and mankind. It was the Yuletide, and I had come at last to the ancient sea town where my people had dwelt and kept festival in the elder time, when festival was forbidden. Where also they had commanded their sons to keep festival once every century, that the memory of primal secrets might not be forgotten. Mine were an old people, and were old even when this land was settled 300 years before. And they were strange, because they had come as a dark, furtive folk from opiate southern gardens of orchids, and spoken another tongue before they learnt the tongue of the blue-eyed fishers. And now they were scattered, and shared only the rituals of mysteries that none living could understand. I was the only one who came back that night to the old fishing town as legend bade, for only the poor and the lonely remember. Then beyond the hill's crest I saw Kingsport outspread frostily in the gloaming snowy Kingsport, with its ancient vanes and steeples, ridge-poles and chimney-pots, wharves and small bridges, willow trees and graveyards, endless labyrinths of steep, narrow, crooked streets, and dizzy church-crowned central peak that time durst not touch. Ceaseless mazes of colonial houses piled and scattered at all angles and levels like a child's disordered blocks. Antiquity hovering on gray wings over winter-whitened gables and gambrel roofs. Fanlights and small-paned windows, one by one, gleaming out in the cold dusk to join Orion and the archaic stars. And against the rotting wharves the sea pounded, the secretive, immemorial sea out of which the people had come in the elder time. Beside the road, at its crest, a still higher summit rose, bleak and windswept, and I saw that it was a burying ground, where black gravestones stuck ghoulishly through the snow like the decayed fingernails of a gigantic corpse. The printless road was very lonely, and sometimes I thought I heard a distant, horrible creaking as of a gibbet in the wind. They had hanged 4 kinsmen of mine for witchcraft in 1692, but I did not know just where. As the road wound down the seaward slope, I listened for the merry sounds of a village at evening, but did not hear them. Then I thought of the season, and felt that these old Puritan folk might well have Christmas customs strange to me, and full of silent hearthside prayers. So after that I did not listen for merriment or look for wayfarers, but kept on down past the hushed lighted farmhouses and shadowy stone walls to where the signs of ancient shops and sea taverns creaked in the salt breeze, and the grotesque knockers of pillared doorways glistened along deserted, unpaved lanes in the light of little curtained windows. I had seen maps of the town and knew where to find the home of my people. It was told that I should be known and welcomed, for village legend lives long. So I hastened through Back Street to Circle Court, and across the fresh snow on the one full flagstone pavement in the town to where Green Lane heads off behind the market house. The old maps were still good, and I had no trouble, though at Arkham they must have lied when they said the trolley ran to this place, since I saw not a wire overhead. Snow would have hid the rails in any case. I was glad I had chosen to walk, for the white village had seemed very beautiful from the hill, and now I was eager to knock at the door of my people, the 7th house on the left in Green Lane, with an ancient peaked roof and jutting second story, all built before 1650. There were lights inside the house when I came upon it, and I saw from the diamond window panes that it must have been kept very close to its antique state. The upper part overhung the narrow grass-grown street, and nearly met the overhanging part of the house opposite, so that I was almost in a tunnel, with the low stone doorstep wholly free from snow. There was no sidewalk, but many houses had high doors reached by double flights of steps with iron railing. It was an odd scene, and because I was strange to New England, I had never known its like before. Though it pleased me, I would have relished it better if there had been footprints in the snow, and people in the streets, and a few windows without drawn curtains. Hello, True King Mob, how are you doing? It's been a while since I've talked to you. How are you holding up? And did you feel the earthquake? Because I felt the earthquake and it scared me. You missed it? You were too high? It was funny. I had woken up at like 3:45 and I decided that I was going to get up to the bathroom. So I got up, went to the bathroom. I had just gotten back into bed. And all of a sudden, I felt movement, and it was the weirdest movement that I've ever felt, like something galloping along. I literally felt it start at one end of the bed and work its way up. And my first thought was, no, it's not a Friday night, I don't think. I'm pretty sure I'm sober. What's going on? And then, of course, as all people do, if you think there might be a disaster, I went to Twitter. And then I went to the USGS, and I filled out the little did you fill it form, and I guess I filled it. I fielded it. I think it was a subduction. I can't remember. That was like ages ago. That was 7 days? But yeah, I think it was a subduction. It was on the Walker Lane on the California Eastern Shear. It wasn't on one of the main faults, but I mean, they always say that there's more likely to be a 9.0 or above that hits the Reno area, and when it does, we're screwed in Northern California too. So that's what my first thought was. But this one was out of Tonopah. All I know of Tonopah is there's a McDonald's there. No, the aliens aren't around Tonopah. We live too far away in Area 51. Aliens aren't giving us earthquakes. The quake babies give us the earthquakes. Yeah, the earthquakes have been getting more frequent. And I mean, in some ways it's to be expected. There's always earthquakes, we just don't feel them. But I sound kind of far. Well, maybe see, I had the microphone turned, and then I realized that I was turning the wrong part and my microphone was about to fall out. So I readjusted it, so I probably had the microphone turned in the wrong direction. Is that better? Yeah, I had the microphone turned the wrong way because I'm a dumbass. But you already know that. You've been to these streams before. This is this is how it goes. But yeah, it was kind of a fun earthquake once I realized that, you know, it's like, but it's kind of sad that my first thought was like, oh my god, did I? No, I didn't take anything. Pretty sure I'm sober. So, yeah. Well, as long as, I mean, the important thing is you didn't have any damage. Obviously, you're still alive. So, we'll continue on with what is apparently a weird Christmas story, and I did not support any, I know. But when I have to work the next day, even though I do work from home, not saying that I day drink, but sometimes I day drink. Shh, don't tell. Also, I should have brought a paper towel in here because I've got water everywhere. Because I am a messy girl. Because I'm a messy girl. I'm a messy girl. I don't even know what I'm singing. I think it was to the tune of the Gummy Bear song. Okay. Back to the story. There were lights inside the house when I came upon it, and I saw from the diamond window panes that it must have been kept very close to its antique state. The upper part overhung the narrow grass-grown street and nearly met the overhanging part of the house opposite, so that I was almost in a tunnel, with the low stone doorstep wholly free from snow. There was no sidewalk, but many houses had high doors reached by double flights of steps with iron railings. It was an odd scene, and because I was strange to New England, I had never known its like before. Though it pleased me, I would have relished it better if there had been footprints in the snow, and people in the street, and a few windows without drawn curtains. When I sounded the archaic iron knocker, I was half afraid. Some fear had been gathering in me, perhaps because of the strangeness of my heritage, and the bleakness of the evening, and the queerness of the silence in that aged town of curious customs. And when my knock was answered, I was fully afraid, because I had not heard any footsteps before the door creaked open. But I was not afraid long, for the gowned, slippered old man in the doorway had a bland face that reassured me, and though he made signs that he was dumb, he wrote a quaint and ancient welcome with the stylus and wax tablet he carried. He beckoned me into a low, candlelit room with massive exposed rafters and dark, stiff, sparse furniture of the 17th century. The past was vivid there, for not an attribute was missing. There was a carnivorous fireplace and a spinning wheel at which a bent old woman in a loose wrapper and deep poke bonnet sat back toward me, silently spinning despite the festive season. An indefinite dampness seemed upon the place, and I marveled that no fire should be blazing. The high-backed settle faced the row of curtained windows at the left, and seemed to be occupied, though I was not sure. I did not like everything about what I saw, and felt again the fear I had had. This fear grew stronger from what had been before lessened it, for the more I looked at the old man's bland face, the more its very blandness terrified me. The eyes never moved, and the skin was too like wax. Finally, I was sure it was not a face at all, but a fiendishly cunning mask. But the flabby hands, curiously gloved, wrote genially on the table and told me I must wait a while before I could be led to the place of the festival. Pointing to a chair, table, and pile of books, the old man now left the room, and when I sat down to read, I saw that the books were hoary and moldy, and that they included old Moister's wild marvels of science, the terrible Something I Can't Pronounce of Joseph Glanville, published in 1681, the shocking Daemon Latria of Remigus, printed in 1595 at Lyons, and worst of all, the unmentionable Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul Alhazred, in a low, swarmious, forbidden Latin translation. A book which I had never seen, but of which I had heard monstrous things whispered. No one spoke to me, but I could hear the creaking of signs in the wind outside, and the whir of the wheel as the bonneted old woman continued her silent spinning. I thought the room and the books and the people very morbid and disquieting, but because an old tradition of my father's had summoned me to strange feastings, I resolved to expect queer things. So I tried to read, and soon became tremblingly absorbed by something I found in that accursed Necronomicon, a thought and a legend too hideous for sanity or consciousness. But I disliked it when I fancied I heard the closing of one of the windows that the settee faced, as if it had been stealthily opened. It had seemed to follow a whirring that was not of the old woman's spinning wheel. This was not much, though, for the old woman was spinning very hard, and the aged clock had been striking. After that I lost the feeling that there were persons on the settee, and was reading intently and shudderingly when the old man came back, booted and dressed in a loose antique costume, and sat down on that very bench so that I could not see him. I was certainly nervous, waiting, and the blasphemous book in my hands made it doubly so. When 11 struck, however, the old man stood up, glided to a massive carved chest in a corner, and got 2 hooded cloaks, one of which he donned, and the other of which he donned around the old woman, who was ceasing her monotonous spinning. Then they both started for the outer door, the woman lamely creeping, the old man, after picking up the very book I had been reading, beckoning me as he drew his hood over that unmoving face, or mask. We went out into the moonless and tortuous network of that incredibly ancient town, and went out as the lights in the curtained windows disappeared one by one, and the dogs started leering at the throng of cowled, cloaked figures that poured silently from every doorway, and formed monstrous processions up this street and that, past the creaking signs and antediluvian gables, the thatched roofs and diamond-paned windows, threading precipitous lanes where decaying houses overlapped and crumbled together, gliding across open courts and churchyards where the bobbing lanterns made eldritch drunken constellations. Amid these hushed throngs I followed my voiceless guides, jostled by elbows that seemed preternaturally soft, and pressed by chests and stomachs that seemed abnormally pulpy, but seeing never a face, and hearing never a word. Up the eerie columns slithered, and I saw that all the travelers were converging as they flowed near a sort of focus of crazy alleys at the top of a high hill in the center of the town, where perched a great white church. I had seen it from the road's crest when I looked at Kingsport in the new dusk, and it had made me shiver, because Aldebaran had seemed to balance itself a moment on the ghostly spire. There was an open space around the church, partly a churchyard with spectral shafts, and partly a half-paved square, swept nearly bare of snow by the wind, and lined with unwholesomely archaic houses having peaked roofs and overhanging gables. Death fires danced over the tombs, revealing gruesome vistas, though queerly failing to cast any shadows. Past the churchyard, where there were no houses, I could see over the hill's summit and watch the glimmer of stars on the harbor, though the town was invisible in the dark. Only once in a while a lantern bobbed horribly through serpentine alleys on its way to overtake the throng that was now slipping speechlessly into the church. I waited till the crowd had oozed into the black doorway, until all the stragglers had followed. The old man was pulling at my sleeve, but I was determined to be the last. Then I finally went, the sinister man and the old spinning woman before me. Crossing the threshold into that swarming temple of unknown darkness, I turned once to look at the outside world as the churchyard phosphorescence cast a sickly glow on the hilltop pavement. And as I did so, I shuddered, for though the wind had not left much snow, a few patches did remain on the path near the door. And in that fleeting backward look, it seemed to my troubled eyes that they bore no mark of passing feet, not even mine. The church was scarce lighted by all the lanterns that had entered it, for most of the throng had already vanished. They had streamed up the aisles between the high white pews to the trap door of the vaults, which yawned loathsomely open just before the pulpit, and were now squirming noiselessly in. I followed dumbly down the foot-worn steps and into the dank, suffocating crypt. The tale of that sinuous line of night marchers seemed very horrible, and as I saw them wriggling into a venerable tomb, they seemed more horrible still. Then I noticed that the tomb's floor had an aperture down which the throng was sliding, and in a moment we were all descending an ominous staircase of rough-hewn stone, a narrow spiral staircase, damp and peculiarly odorous, that wound endlessly down into the bowels of the hill, past monotonous walls of dripping stone blocks and crumbling mortar. It was a silent, shocking descent, and I observed after a horrible interval that the walls and steps were changing in nature, as if chiseled out of the solid rock. What mainly troubled me was the myriad footfalls made no sound, and set up no echoes. After more aeons of descent, I saw some side passages or burrows leading from unknown recesses of blackness to this shaft of nighted mystery. Soon they became excessively numerous, like impious catacombs of nameless menace, and their pungent odor of decay grew quite unbearable. I knew we must have passed down through the mountain and beneath the earth of Kingsport itself, and I shivered that a town should be so aged and maggoty with subterraneous evil. Then I saw the lurid shimmer of pale light, and heard the insidious lapping of sunless waters. Again I shivered, for I did not like the things that the night had brought, and wished bitterly that no forefather had summoned me to this primal rite. As the steps and the passage grew broader, I heard another sound, the thin, whining mockery of a feeble flute, and suddenly there spread out before me the boundless vista of an inner world. A vast fungus shore, litten by a belching column of sick greenish flame, and washed by a wide, oily river that flowed from abyss frightful and unsuspected to join the blackest gulfs of immemorial ocean. Fainting and gasping, I looked at that unhallowed Erebus of Titan toadstools, leprous fire, and slimy water, and saw the cloaked throngs forming a semicircle around the blazing pillar. It was the Yule rite, older than man and fated to survive them. The primal rites of the solstice and of spring's promise beyond the snows. The rite of fire and evergreen, light and music. And in the Stygian grotto I saw them do the rite, and adore the sick pillar of flame, and throw into the water handfuls gouged of the viscous vegetation which glittered green in the chlorotic glare. I saw this, and I saw something amorphously squatted far away from the light, piping noiselessly on a flute, and as the thing piped I thought I heard noxious muffled flutterings in the fetid darkness where I could not see. But what frightened me most was that flaming column, spouting volcanically from depths profound and inconceivable, casting no shadows as healthy flame should, and coating the nitrous stone above with a nasty venomous verdigris. For in all that seething combustion no warmth lay, but only the clamminess of death and corruption. The man who had brought me now squirmed to a point directly beside the hideous flame, and made stiff ceremonial motions to the semicircle he faced. At certain stages of the ritual, they did groveling obeisance, especially when he held above his hand that abhorrent Necronomicon he had taken with him. And I shared all the obeisances because I had been summoned to this festival by the writings of my forefathers. Then the old man made a signal to the half-seen flute player in the darkness, which player thereupon changed its feeble drone to a scarce louder drone in another key, precipitating as it did so a horror unthinkable and unexpected. At this horror I sank nearly to the lichened earth, transfixed with a dread not of this nor any world, but only of the mad spaces between the stars. Out of the unimaginable blackness beyond the gangrenous glare of that cold flame, out of the Tartarian leagues through which that oily river rolled uncanny, unheard, and unsuspected, there flopped rhythmically a horde of tame, trained, hybrid winged things that no sound eye could ever wholly grasp, or sound brain ever wholly remember. They were not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, nor ants, nor vampire bats, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. They flopped limply along, half with their webbed feet and half with their membranous wings, and as they reached the throng of celebrants, the cowled figures seized and mounted them, and rode off one by one along the reaches of that unlighted river, into pits and galleries of panic, where poisoned springs feed frightful and undiscoverable cataracts. The old spinning woman had gone with the throng, and the old man remained only because I had refused when he motioned me to seize an animal and ride like the rest. I saw when I staggered to my feet that the amorphous flute player had rolled out of sight, but that two of the beasts were patiently standing by. As I hung back, the old man produced his stylet and tablet, and wrote that he was the true deputy of my fathers who had founded the Yule worship in this ancient place, that it had been decreed I should come back, and that the most secret mysteries were yet to be performed. He wrote this in a very ancient hand, and when I still hesitated, he pulled from his loose robe a seal ring and a watch, both with my family arms, to prove that he was what he said. But it was a hideous proof, because I knew from old papers that the watch had been buried with my great-great-great-great-grandfather in 1968. Presently the old man drew back his hood and pointed to the family resemblance in his face, but I only shuddered because I was sure that the face was merely a devilish waxen mask. The flopping animals were now scratching restlessly at the lichens, and I saw that the old man was nearly as restless himself. When one of the things began to waddle and edge away, he turned quickly to stop it, so that the suddenness of his motion dislodged the waxen mask from what should have been his head. And then, because that nightmare's position barred me from the stone staircase down which we had come, I flung myself into the oily underground river that bubbled somewhere to the caves of the sea, flung myself into that protescent juice of earth's inner horrors before the madness of my screams could bring down upon me all the carnal legions these pest gulfs might conceal. At the hospital they told me I had been found half frozen in Kingsport Harbor at dawn, clinging to the drifting spar that accident sent to save me. They told me I had taken the wrong fork of the hill road the night before and fallen over the cliffs at Orange Point, a thing they deduced from prints found in the snow. There was nothing I could say because everything was wrong. Everything was wrong, with the broad window showing a sea of roofs in which only about 1 in 5 was ancient, and the sound of trolleys and motors in the streets below. They insisted that this was Kingsport, and I could not deny it. When I went delirious at hearing that the hospital stood near the old churchyard on Central Hill, they sent me to St. Mary's Hospital in Arkham, where I could have better care. I liked it there, for the doctors were broad-minded, and even lent me their influence in obtaining the carefully sheltered copy of Ahasred's objectionable Necronomicon from the library of Miskatonic University. They said something about a psychosis, and agreed I had better get any harassing obsessions off my mind. Hi, Album. How are you doing? I'm glad to see you here. So I read again that hideous chapter, and shuddered doubly because it was indeed not new to me. I had seen it before, let footprints tell what they might, and where it was I had seen it were best forgotten. There was no one in waking hours who could remind me of it, but my dreams are filled with terror because of phrases I dare not quote. I dare quote only one paragraph, put into such English as I can make from the awkward Low Latin. The nethermost caverns, wrote the mad Arab, are not for the fathoming of eyes that see, for their marvels are strange and terrific. Cursed the ground where dead thoughts live, new and oddly bodied, and evil the mind that is held by no head. Wisely did some name I'm not going to try to butcher, say that happy is the tomb where no wizard hath lain, and happy the town at night whose wizards are all ashes. For it is of old rumor that the soul of the devil-bought hastes not from his carnal clay, but fats and instructs the very worm that gnaws, till out of corruption horrid life springs, and the dull scavengers of earth wax crafty to vex it, and spell monstrous to plague it. Great holes secretly are digged, where earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learnt to walk that ought to crawl. Wait, what? What did you say, Albal? What have you done? Anyway, that was the end of the festival, and I just closed Kindle because I'm a dumbass. Okay. Hi, Drumbaka. How are you doing? You swore. Don't be swearing. But still, I mean, I don't. Oh my God. What bot is doing this now? I miss my old bot. It's my old bot that didn't care about swearing. Don't be swearing. I'll just turn myself off. I don't know what I'm doing. Is that all there? You can swear all you want now, Albal. You swear to your little heart's content. And I get into mod mode. Thank you for the host, Rambaka. I don't know what I'm doing. Hi, IR Pro Streamer. Oh. Okay, that was better. You got some time away from the house with your family, but that is good. That is always good. And yes, you can all swear to your little heart's contents now, I think. I mean, I would test it, but I know that I can swear. Can you post links? Yes, you should be able to post links, because you are a VIP. VIPs can post links. What's this? A two-faced kitten. Oh, look at that precious baby. I hope she lives. I hope Biscuits and Gravy lives. Miss Sweetie. So that was the festival. I'm really starting to not like Lovecraft that much. He just ends his stories. It's like he gets bored with reading them and we'll just end it. Let's see, what other story can we read? Another story. Shall we read? Maybe I knew how to use the freaking Kindle. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Indescribable horror more descriptible than previously believed. Yeah. Yep. Well, in honor of Biscuits and Gravy, the Two-Faced Kitten, I am going to read one of the stories I actually do like of Lovecraft's that I've read before, and that is The Cats of Ulthar. Because it's a good story. And it's about cats, so it's awesome. It is said that in Ulthar, which lies beyond the river Sky, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe as I gaze upon him who sitteth purring before the fire. For the cat is cryptic, and close to strange things which men cannot see. He is the soul of antique Egyptus, and bearer of tales from forgotten cities in Meroe and Ophir. He is the kin of the jungle's lords, and heir to the secrets of hoary and sinister Africa. The Sphinx is his cousin, and he speaks her language. But he is more ancient than the Sphinx, and remembers that which she hath forgotten. In Ulthar, before ever the burgesses forbade the killing of cats, there dwelt an old cotter and his wife, who delighted to trap and slay the cats of their neighbors. Why they did this I know not, save that many hate the voice of the cat in the night, and take it ill that cats should run stealthily about yards and gardens at twilight. But whatever the reason, this old man and woman took pleasure in trapping and slaying every cat which came near to their hovel. And from some of the sounds heard after dark, many villagers fancied that the manner of slaying was exceedingly peculiar. But the villagers did not discuss such things with the old man and his wife, because of the habitual expression on the withered faces of the two, and because their cottage was so small and so darkly hidden under spreading oaks at the back of a neglected yard. In truth, much as the owners of cats hated these odd folk, they feared them more, and instead of berating them as brutal assassins, merely took care that no cherished pet or mouser should stray towards the remote hovel under the dark trees. When through some unavoidable oversight a cat was missed, and sounds heard after dark, the loser would lament impotently, or console himself by thanking fate that it was not one of his children who had thus vanished. For the people of Ulthar were simple, and knew not whence it is all cats first came. One day a caravan of strange wanderers from the south entered the narrow cobbled streets of Ulthar. Dark wanderers they were, and unlike the other roving folk who passed through the village twice each year. In the marketplace they told fortunes for silver, and bought gay beads from the merchants. What was the land of these wanderers none could tell, but it was seen that they were given to strange prayers, and that they had painted on the sides of their wagons strange figures with human bodies and the heads of cats, hawks, rams, and lions. And the leader of the caravan wore a headdress with 2 horns and a curious disc betwixt the horns. There was in this singular caravan a little boy with no father or mother, but only a tiny black kitten to cherish. The plague had not been kind to him, yet had left him this small furry thing to mitigate his sorrow, and when one is very young, one can find great relief in the lively antics of a black kitten. So the boy, whom the dark people called Menace, smiled more often than he wept as he sat playing with his graceful kitten on the steps of an oddly painted wagon. On the 3rd morning of the wanderer's stay in Ulthar, Menace could not find his kitten, and he sobbed aloud in the marketplace. Certain villagers told him of the old man and his wife, and of sounds heard in the night. And when he heard these things, his sobbing gave way to meditation, and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms towards the sun and prayed in a tongue no villager could understand, though indeed the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the little boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous figures of exotic things, of hybrid creatures crowned with horn-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. That night the wanderers left Althar, and were never seen again. And the householders were troubled when they noticed that in all the village there was not a cat to be found. From each hearth the familiar cat had vanished. Cats large and small, black, gray, striped, yellow, and white. Old Crannan, the burgomaster, swore that the dark folk had taken the cats away in revenge for the killing of Mena's kitten, and cursed the caravan and the little boy. But Nith, the lean notary, declared that the old cotter and his wife were more likely persons to suspect, for their hatred of cats was notorious and increasingly bold. Still, no one durst complain to the sinister couple, even when little Adel, the innkeeper's son, vowed that he had at twilight seen all the cats of Ulthar in that accursed yard under the trees, pacing very slowly and solemnly in a circle around the cottage, two abreast, as if in performance of some unheard-of rite of beasts. The villagers did not know how much to believe from so small a boy, and though they feared that the evil pair had charmed the cats to their death, they preferred not to chide the old cotter till they met him outside his dark and repellent yard. So Ulthar went to sleep in vain anger, and when the people awakened at dawn, behold, every cat was back at his accustomed hearth. Large and small, black, gray, striped, yellow, and white, none were missing. Very sleek and fat did the cats appear, with sonorous, with purring content. The citizens talked with one another of the affair, and marveled not a little. Old Crannan again insisted that it was the dark folk who had taken them, since cats did not return alive from the cottage of the ancient man and his wife. But all agreed on one thing, that the refusal of all the cats to eat their portions of meat or drink their saucers of milk was exceedingly curious. And for 2 whole days the sleek, lazy cats of Ulthar would touch no food, but only doze by the fire or in the sun. It was fully a week before the villagers noticed that no lights were appearing at dusk in the windows of the cottage under the trees. Then the lean Nith remarked that no one had seen the old man or his wife since the night the cats were away. In another week the burgomaster decided to overcome his fears and call at the strangely silent dwelling as a matter of duty, though in doing so he was careful to take with him Shang the blacksmith and Thul the cutter, as stone, as witnesses. And when they had broken down the frail door, they found only this: 2 cleanly picked human skeletons on the earthen floor, and a number of singular beetles crawling in the shadowy corners. There was subsequently much talk among the burgess of Ulthar. Zath the coroner disputed at length with Nith the lean notary, and Crannan and Shang and Thul were overwhelmed with questions. Even little Adel, the innkeeper's son, was closely questioned and given a sweetmeat as reward. They talked of the old cotter and his wife, of the caravan of dark wanderers, of small Menes and his black kitten, of the prayer of Menes and of the sky during that prayer, of the doings of the cats on the night the caravan left, and of what was later found in the cottage, under the dark trees, in the repellent yard. And in the end the burgesses passed that remarkable law which is told of by traders in Hatheg and discussed by travelers in Nir, namely, that in Ulthar no man may kill a cat. And that is the Lovecraft version of Don't Fuck with Cats. But I do like that story. So you don't fuck with cats. I think I am going to take a quick break because I have lost the feeling in my ass. It's probably a sign I need to stand up and get some water. But I will not be gone long. Probably only like 5 minutes. Long enough for me to walk to the kitchen and get some water and come back. So I will see you all shortly. Alright, I am back and I remembered to unmute the microphone. So, hey, I'm doing good. It ain't right creeping around my garden with sneaky little cat feet. That's right, sneaky little cat feet. Alright, the next story is The Descendant. Excuse me while I open my soda. I will try not to burp while I'm reading, because I are a pro streamer. Okay. Writing on what my doctor tells me is my deathbed, my most hideous fear is that the man is wrong. I suppose I shall seem to be buried next week, but in London there is a man who screams when the church bell rings. He lives all alone with his streaked cat in Gray's Inn, and people call him harmlessly mad. His room is filled with books of the tamest and most puerile kind, and hour after hour he tries to lose himself in their feeble pages. All he seeks from life is not to think. For some reason, thought is very horrible to him, and anything which stirs the imagination he flees as a plague. He is very thin and gray and wrinkled, but there are those who declare he is not nearly so old as he looks. Fear has its grisly claws upon him, and a sound will make him start with staring eyes and sweating beaded forehead. Friends and companions he shuns, for he wishes to answer no questions. Those who once knew him as scholar and aesthete say it is very pitiful to see him now. He dropped them all years ago, and no one feels sure whether he left the country or merely sank from sight in some hidden byway. It is a decade now since he moved into Gray's Inn, and of where he had been he would say nothing till the night young Williams brought him the Necronomicon. Williams was a dreamer, and only 23, and when he moved into the ancient house he felt a strangeness and a breath of cosmic wind about the gray wizened man in the next room. He forced his friendship where old friends dared not force, and marveled at the fright that sat upon this gaunt, haggard watcher and listener. For what the man always watched and listened, no one could doubt. He watched and listened with his mind more than with his eyes and ears, and strove every moment to drown something in his ceaseless poring over gay, insipid novels. And when the church bells rang, he would stop his ears and scream, and the gray cat that dwelt with him would howl in unison till the last peal died reverberantly away. But try as Williams would, he could not make his neighbor speak of anything profound or hidden. The old man would not live up to his aspect and manner, but would feign a smile and a light tone and prattle feverishly and frantically of cheerful trifles, his voice every moment rising and thickening till at last it was split in a piping and incoherent falsetto. That his learning was deep and thorough, his most trivial remarks made abundantly clear, and Williams was not surprised to hear that he had been to Harrow and Oxford. Later it developed that he was none other than Lord Northam, of whose ancient hereditary castle on the Yorkshire coast so many odd things were told. But when Williams tried to talk of the castle and of its reputed Roman origin, he refused to admit that there was anything unusual about it. He was tittered shrilly when the subject of the supposed undercrypts, hewn out of the solid crag that frowns down the North Sea, was brought up. So matters went till that night when Williams brought home the infamous Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred. He had known of the dreaded volume since his 16th year, when his dawning love of the bizarre had led him to ask queer questions of a bent old bookseller in Chandos Street, and he had always wondered why men paled when they spoke of it. The old bookseller had told him that only 5 copies were known to have survived the shocked edicts of priests and lawgivers against it, and that all of these were locked up with frightened care by custodians who had ventured to begin a reading of the hateful black letter. But now at last he had not only found an accessible copy, but had made it his own at a ludicrously low figure. It was at a shop in the squalid precincts of Clare Market, where he had often bought strange things before, and he almost fancied the gnarled old Levite smiled amidst tangles of beard as the great discovery was made. The bulky leather cover with the brass clasp had been so prominently visible, and the price so absurdly slight. The one glimpse he had of the title was enough to send him into transports, and some of the diagrams set in the vague Latin text excited the tensest and most disquieting recollections in his brain. He felt it was highly necessary to get the ponderous thing home and begin deciphering it, and bore it out of the shop with such haste that the old Jew chuckled disturbingly behind him. But when at last it was safe in his room, he found the combination of black letter and debased idiom too much for his powers as a linguist, and reluctantly called on his strange, frightened friend for help with the twisted medieval Latin. Lord Northam was simpering inanities to his streaked cat, and started violently when the young man entered. Then he saw the volume and shuddered wildly, and fainted altogether when Williams uttered the title. It was when he regained his senses that he told his story, told his fantastic figment of madness in frantic whispers, lest his friend be not quick to burn the accursed book and give wide scattering to its ashes. There must, Lord Northam whispered, have been something wrong at the start, but it would never have come to a head if he had not explored it too far. He was the 19th Baron of a line whose beginnings went uncomfortably far back into the past, unbelievably far if vague tradition could be heeded, for there were family tales of a descent from pre-Saxon times when a certain Gnaeus Gabinius Capito, military tribune in the 3rd Augustan Legion, then stationed at Lindum in Roman Britain, had been summarily expelled from his command for participation in certain rites unconnected with any known religion. Gabinius had, the rumor ran, come upon a cliffside cavern where strange folk met together and made the elder sign in the dark. Strange folk whom the Britons knew not save in fear, and who were the last to survive from a great land in the west that had sunk, leaving only the islands with the raths and circles and shrines of which Stonehenge was the greatest. There was no certainty, of course, in the legend that Gabinius had built an impregnable fortress over the forbidden cave and founded a line which Pict and Saxon, Dane and Norman were powerless to obliterate, or in the tacit assumption that from this line sprang the bold companion and lieutenant of the Black Prince whom Edward III created Baron of Northam. These things were not certain, yet they were often told. And in truth, the stonework of Northam Keep did look alarmingly like the masonry of Hadrian's Wall. As a child, Lord Northam had had peculiar dreams when sleeping in the older parts of the castle, and had acquired a constant habit of looking back through his memory for half-amorphous scenes and patterns and impressions which formed no part of his waking experience. He became a dreamer who found life tame and unsatisfying, a searcher for strange realms and relationships once familiar, yet lying nowhere in the visible regions of earth. Filled with a feeling that our tangible world is only an atom in a fabric vast and ominous, and that unknown dimensions press on and permeate the sphere of the known at every point. Northam in youth and young manhood drained in turn the founts of formal religion and occult mystery. Nowhere, however, could he find ease and content, and as he grew older, the staleness and limitations of life became more and more maddening to him. During the 90s, he dabbled in Satanism, and at all times he devoured avidly any doctrine or theory which seemed to promise escape from the close vistas of science and the dully unvarying laws of nature. Books like Ignatius Donnelly's chimerical account of Atlantis he absorbed with zest, and a dozen obscure precursors of Charles Fort enthralled him with their vagaries. He would travel leagues to follow up a furtive village tale of abnormal wonder, and once went into the desert of Araby to seek a nameless city of faint report, which no man has ever beheld. No, stop scanning. Oh my god. Dell support assist just started scanning the computer. Stop it. Okay, I think I have killed him. We will find out. There rose within him the tantalizing faith that somewhere an easy gate existed, which if one found would admit him freely to those outer deeps whose echoes rattled so dimly the back of his memory. It might be in the visible world, yet it might be only in his mind and soul. Perhaps he held within his own half-explored brain that cryptic link which would awaken him to elder and future lives in forgotten dimensions, which would bind him to the stars and to the infinities and eternities beyond them. So I guess we just went back to the first story that we read, and again it just ends. I'm starting to think The Color from Space and The Cats of Althar are the only good stories he wrote. I might have to find some new books to read. The Doom That Came to Sarnath. There is in the land of Nar a vast still lake that is fed by no stream, and out of which no stream flows. 10,000 years ago there stood by its shore the mighty city of Sarnath, but Sarnath stands there no more. It is told that in the immemorial years when the world was young, before ever the men of Sarnath came to the land of Nar, another city stood beside the lake, the gray stone city of Ib, which was old as the lake itself and peopled with beings not pleasing to behold. Very odd and ugly were these beings, as indeed are most beings of a world yet inchoate and rudely fashioned. It is written on the brick cylinders of Cadatharon that the beings of Ib were in hue as green as the lake and the mists that rise above it, that they had bulging eyes, pouting, flabby lips, and curious ears, and were without voice. It is also written that they descended one night from the moon in a mist, they and the vast still lake and gray stone city of Ib. However this may be, it is certain that they worshipped a sea-green stone idol chiseled in the likeness of Bakrug, the great water lizard, before which they danced horribly when the moon was gibbous. And it is written in the papyrus of Ilarnek that they one day discovered fire, and thereafter kindled flames on many ceremonial occasions. But not much is written of these beings, because they lived in very ancient times, and man is young, and knows little of the very ancient living things. After many aeons, men came to the land of Nar, dark shepherd folk with their fleecy flocks, who built Thra Ilnarek and Cadatharon on the winding river Ai. And certain tribes, more hardy than the rest, pushed on to the border of the lake and built Sarnath at a spot where precious metals were found in the earth. Not far from the gray city of Ib did the wandering tribes lay the first stones of Sarnath, and at the beings of Ib they marveled greatly. But with their marveling was mixed hate, for they thought it not meet that beings of such aspect should walk upon the world of men at dusk. Nor did they like the strange sculptures upon the gray monoliths of Ib, for those sculptures were terrible, with great antiquity. Why the beings and the sculptures lingered so late in the world, even until the coming of men, none can tell, unless it was because the land of Nar is very still and remote from most other lands, both of waking and of dream. As the men of Sarnath beheld more of the beings of Ib, their hate grew, and it was not less because they found the beings weak and soft as jelly to the touch of stones and spears and arrows. So one day the young warriors, the slingers and the spearmen and the bowmen, marched against Ib and slew all the inhabitants thereof, pushing the queer bodies into the lake with long spears, because they did not wish to touch them. And because they did not like the gray sculptured monoliths of Ib, they cast these also into the lake, wondering from the greatness of the labor how even the stones were brought from afar, as they must have been, since there is naught like them in all the land of Nar or in the lands adjacent. Thus of the very ancient city of Ib was nothing spared, save the sea-green stone idol chiseled in the likeness of Bakrug, the water lizard. This young warriors took back with them to Sarnath as a symbol of conquest over the old gods and beings of Ib, and a sign of leadership in Nar. But on the night after it was set up in the temple, a terrible thing must have happened, for weird lights were seen over the lake, and in the morning the people found the idol gone, and the high priest Taran-Ish lying dead, as from some fear unspeakable. And before he died, Taran-Ish had scrawled upon the altar of Kyrosite, with coarse, shaky strokes, the sign of doom. After Taran-Ish there were many high priests in Sarnath, but never was the sea-green stone idol found. And many centuries came and went, wherein Sarnath prospered exceedingly, so that only priests and old women remembered that Taran-Ish had scrawled upon the altar of Kyrosite. Betwixt Sarnath and the city of Ilnarek arose a caravan route, and the precious metals from the earth were exchanged for other metals and rare cloths and jewels and books and tools for artificers and all things of luxury that are known to the people who dwell along the winding river Ai and beyond. So Sarnath waxed mighty and learned and beautiful, and sent forth conquering armies to subdue the neighboring cities. And in time there sate upon a throne in Sarnath the kings of all the lands of Nar and of many lands adjacent. The wonder of the world and the pride of all mankind was Sarnath the Magnificent. Of polished, desert-quarried marble were its walls, in height 300 cubits, and in breadth 75, so that chariots might pass each other as men drave them along the top. For full 500 stadia did they run, being open only on the side towards the lake, where a green stone seawall kept back the waves that oddly rose once a year at the festival of the destroying of Ib. In Sarnath were 50 streets from the lake to the gates of the caravans, and 50 more intersecting them. With onyx were they paved, save those whereon the horses and camels and elephants trod, which were paved with granite. And the gates of Sarnath were as many as the landward ends of the streets, each of bronze and flanked by the figures of lions and elephants carven from some stone no longer known among men. The houses of Sarnath were of glazed brick and chalcedony, each having its walled garden and crystal lakelet. With strange art were they builded, for no other city had houses like them, and travelers from Thra and Ilnarek and Kadatheron marveled at the shining domes wherewith they were surmounted. But more marvelous still were the palaces and the temples and the gardens made by Zakar, the Golden King. There were many palaces, the least of which were mightier than any in Thra or Ilnarek or Kadatheron. So high were they that one within might sometimes fancy himself beneath only the sky. Yet, when lighted with torches dipped in the oil of Dethur, their walls showed vast paintings of kings and armies, of a splendor at once inspiring and stupefying to behold. Many were the pillars of the palaces, all of tinted marble and carven into designs of surpassing beauty. And in most of the palaces the floors were mosaics of beryl and lapis lazuli, and sardonyx and carbuncle and other choice materials, so disposed that the beholder might fancy himself walking over beds of the rarest flowers. And there were likewise fountains, which cast scented waters about in pleasing jets arranged with cunning art. Outshining all others was the palace of the kings of Nar and of the lands adjacent. On a pair of golden crouching lions rested the throne, many steps above the gleaming floor. And it was wrought of one piece of ivory, though no man lives who knows whence so vast a piece could have come. In that palace there were also many galleries and many amphitheaters where lions and men and elephants battled at the pleasure of the kings. Sometimes the amphitheaters were flooded with water conveyed from the lake in mighty aqueducts, and then were enacted stirring sea fights, or combats betwixt swimmers and deadly marine things. Lofty and amazing were the 17 tower-like temples of Sarnath, fashioned of a bright, multicolored stone not known elsewhere. A full 1,000 cubits high stood the greatest among them, wherein the high priests dwelt with a magnificence scarce less than that of the kings. On the ground were halls as vast and splendid as those of the palaces, where gathered throngs in worship of Zokalar and Tamash and Laban, the chief gods of Sarnath, whose incense-enveloped shrines were as the thrones of monarchs. Not like the icons of other gods were those of Zokalar and Tamash and Laban, for so close to life were they that one might swear the graceful bearded gods themselves sate on the ivory thrones. And up unending steps of shining zircon was the tower chamber, where from the high priest looked out over the city and the plains and the lake by day, and at the cryptic moon and significant stars and planets and their reflections in the lake by night. Here was done the very secret and ancient rite in detestation of Bakrug, the water lizard, and here rested the altar of Kyrosite, which bore the doom scrawl of Taran-Ish. Wonderful likewise were the gardens made by Zokar, the olden king. In the center of Sarnath they lay, covering a great space and encircled by a high wall. And they were surmounted by a mighty dome of glass, through which shone the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was clear, and from which were hung fulgent images of the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was not clear. In summer the gardens were cooled by fresh odorous breezes, skillfully wafted by fans, and in winter they were heated with concealed fires, so that in those gardens it was always spring. There ran little streams over bright pebbles, dividing meads of green and gardens of many hues, and spanned by a multitude of bridges. Many were the waterfalls in their courses, and many were the lily lakelets into which they expanded. Over the streams and lakelets rode white swans, whilst the music of rare birds chimed in with the melody of the waters. In ordered terraces rose the green banks, adorned here and there with bowers of vines and sweet blossoms, and seats and benches of marble and porphyry. And there were many small shrines and temples where one might rest or pray to small gods. Each year there was celebrated in Sarnath the feast of the destroying of Ib, at which time wine, song, dancing, and merriment of every kind abounded. Great honors were then paid to the shades of those who had annihilated the odd ancient beings, and the memory of those beings and of their elder gods were derided by dancers and lutanists crowned with roses from the gardens of Zokar. And the kings would look out over the lake and curse the bones of the dead that lay beneath it. At first the high priests liked not these festivals, for there had descended among them queer tales of how the sea-green icon had vanished, and how Taran-Ish had died from fear and left a warning. And they said that from their high tower they sometimes saw lights beneath the waters of the lake. But as many years passed without calamity, even the priests laughed and cursed and joined in the orgies of the feasters. Indeed, had they not themselves in their high tower often performed the very ancient and secret rite in detestation of Bakrug, the water lizard? And 1,000 years of riches and delight passed over Sarnath, wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Gorgeous beyond thought was the feast of the 1,000th year of the destroying of Ib. For a decade had it been talked of in the land of Nar, and as it drew nigh there came to Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants men from Thra, Ilnarek, and Kadathron, and all the cities of Nar and the lands beyond. Before the marble walls on the appointed night were pitched the pavilions of princes and the tents of travelers, and all the shores resounded with the song of happy revelers. Within his banquet hall reclined Nargis-Hay, the king, drunken with ancient wine from the vaults of conquered Nath, and surrounded by feasting nobles and hurrying slaves. There were eaten many strange delicacies at that feast: peacocks from the isles of Nariel in the middle ocean, young goats from the distant hills of Implin, heels of camels from the Nazik Desert, nuts and spices from Sidrathian groves, and pearls from wave-washed Tal, dissolved in the vinegar of Thra. Of sauces there were an untold number, prepared by the subtlest cooks in Alnar, and suited to the palate of every feaster. But most prized of all the viands were the great fishes from the lake, each of vast size and served up on golden platters set with rubies and diamonds. Whilst the king and his nobles feasted within the palace, and viewed the crowning dish as it awaited them on golden platters, others feasted elsewhere. In the tower of the great temple the priests held revels, and in pavilions without the walls the princes of neighboring lands made merry. And it was the high priest, Naika, who first saw the shadows that descended from the gibbous moon into the lake, and the damnable green mist that arose from the lake to meet the moon, and to shroud in a sinister haze the towers and the domes of fated Sarnath. Thereafter those in the towers and without the walls beheld strange lights on the water, and saw that the grey rock Akurion, which was wont to rear high above it near the shore, was almost submerged. And fear grew vaguely, yet swiftly, so that the princes of Ilnarek and of Far Rakal took down and folded their tents and pavilions and departed for the River Eye, though they scarce knew the reason for their departing. Then, close to the hour of midnight, all the bronze gates of Sarnath burst open and emptied forth a frenzied throng that blackened the plain, so that all the visiting princes and travelers fled away in fright. For on the faces of this throng was writ a madness born of horror unendurable, and on their tongues were words so terrible that no hearer paused for proof. Men whose eyes were wild with fear shrieked aloud of the sight within the king's banquet hall, where through the windows were seen no longer the forms of Nargis High and his nobles and slaves, but a horde of indescribable green voiceless things, with bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips, and curious ears, things which danced horribly, bearing in their paws golden platters set with rubies and diamonds, containing uncouth flames. And the princes and travelers, as they fled from the doomed city of Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, looked again upon the mist-begetted lake, and saw the grey rock Akurion was quite submerged. Through all the land of Nar and the lands adjacent spread the tales of those who had fled from Sarnath, and caravans sought that accursed city and its precious metals no more. It was long ere any traveler went thither, and even then only the brave and adventurous young men of distant Felona dared make the journey, adventurous young men of yellow hair and blue eyes, who are no kin to the men of Nar. These men indeed went to the lake to view Sarnath, but though they found the vast still lake itself, and the grey rock Akurion which rears high above it near the shore, they beheld not the wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Where once had risen walls of 300 cubits and towers yet higher, now stretched only the marshy shore, and where once had dwelt 50 million of men, now crawled only the detestable green water lizard. Not even the mines of precious metal remained, for doom had come to Sarnath. But half buried in the rushes was spied a curious green idol of stone, an exceedingly ancient idol coated with seaweed and chiseled in the likeness of Bakrug, the great water lizard. That idol, enshrined in the high temple of Ilnarek, was subsequently worshipped beneath the gibbous moon throughout the land of Nar. And that's the end of that story. This story is too long. another story. See what the moon brings is about. I hate the moon. I am afraid of it, for when it shines on certain scenes familiar and loved, it sometimes makes them unfamiliar and hideous. It was in the spectral summer when the moon shone down on the old garden where I wandered. The spectral summer of narcotic flowers and humid seas of foliage that bring wild and many-colored dreams. And as I walked by the shallow crystal stream, I saw unwanted ripples tipped with yellow light, as if those placid waters were drawn on in resistless currents to strange oceans that are not in the world. Silent and sparkling, bright and baleful, those moon-cursed waters hurried I know not whither, whilst from the embowered bank white lotus blossoms fluttered one by one in the opiate night wind and dropped despairingly into the stream, swirling away horribly under the arched carven bridge and staring back with the sinister resignation of calm, dead faces. And as I ran along the shore, crushing sleeping flowers with heedless feet and maddened either by the fear of unknown things and the lure of the dead faces, I saw that the garden had no end under that moon. For where by day the walls were, there stretched now only new vistas of trees and paths, flowers and shrubs, stone idols and pagodas, and bending of the yellow-litten stream, past grassy banks and under grotesque bridges of marble. And the lips of the dead lotus faces whispered sadly, and bade me follow. Nor did I cease my steps till the stream became a river, and joined amidst marshes of swaying reeds and beaches of gleaming sand the shore of a vast and nameless sea. Upon that sea a hateful moon shone, and over its unvocal waves weird perfumes breathed. And as I saw therein the lotus faces vanish, I longed for nets that I might capture them, and learn from them the secrets which the moon had brought upon the night. But when the moon went over to the west, and the still tide ebbed from the sullen shore, I saw, in that old light, spires that the waves almost uncovered, and white columns gay with festoons of green seaweed. And knowing that to this sunken place all the dead had come, I trembled, and did not wish again to speak with the lotus faces. Yet when I saw afar out in the sea a black condor descend from the sky to seek rest on a vast reef, I would fain have questioned him, and asked him of those whom I had known when they were alive. This I would have asked him had he not been so far away, but he was very far and could not be seen at all when he drew nigh that gigantic reef. So I watched the tide go out under that sinking moon, and saw gleaming the spires and towers and the roofs of the dead dripping city. And as I watched, my nostrils tried to close against the perfume, conquering stench of the world's dead. For truly in this unplaced and forgotten spot had all the flesh of the churchyards gathered for puffy sea worms to gnaw and glut upon. Over those horrors the evil moon now hung very low, but the puffy worms of the sea need no moon to feed by. And as I watched the ripples that told of the writhing of worms beneath, I felt a new chill from afar out whither the condor had flown, as if my flesh had caught a horror before my eyes had seen it. Nor had my flesh trembled without cause, for when I raised my eyes, I saw that the waters had ebbed very low, showing much of the vast reef whose rim I had seen before. And when I saw that this reef was but the black basalt crown of a shocking icon whose monstrous forehead now shone in the dim moonlight, and whose vile hooves must paw the hellish ooze miles below, I shrieked and shrieked lest the hidden face rise above the waters, and lest the hidden eyes look at me after the slinking away of that leering and treacherous yellow moon. And to escape this relentless thing, I plunged gladly and unhesitatingly into the stinking shallows, where amidst weedy walls and sunken streets, fat sea worms feast upon the world's dead. And that is the end of that story. I don't know, is it just me or do all these stories just end? And the next one is Polaris. Into the north window of my chamber glows the pole star with uncanny light. All through the long hellish hours of blackness it shines there. And in the autumn of the year, when the winds from the north curse and whine, and the red-leaved trees of the swamp mutter things to one another in the small hours of the morning under the horned waning moon, I sit by the casement and watch that star. Down from the heights rises the glittering Cassiopeia as the hours wear on, while Charles Wayne lumbers up from behind the vapor-soaked swamp trees that sway in the night wind. Just before dawn, Arcturus winks ruddily from above the cemetery on the low hillock, and Coma Berenices shimmer weirdly afar off in the mysterious east. But still the pole star leers down from the same place in the black vault, winking hideously like an insane watching eye which strives to convey some strange message, yet recalls nothing save that it once had a message to convey. Sometimes, when it is cloudy, I can sleep. Well do I remember the night of the great aurora, when over the swamp played the shocking coruscations of the daemon light. After the beams came clouds, and then I slept. And it was under a horned waning moon that I saw the city for the first time. Still and somnolent did it lie, on a strange plateau in a hollow betwixt strange peaks. Of ghastly marble were its walls and its towers, its columns, stones, and pavements. In the marble streets were marble pillars, the upper parts of which were carven into the images of gray-bearded men. The air was warm and stirred not, and overhead, scarce 10 degrees from the zenith, glowed that watching pole star. Long did I gaze on the city, but the day came not. When the red Aldebaran, which blinked low in the sky but never set, had crawled a quarter of the way around the horizon, I saw light and motion in the houses and the streets. Forms strangely robed, but at once noble and familiar, walked abroad, and under the horned waning moon men talked wisdom in a tongue which I understood, though it was unlike any language I had ever known. And when the red Aldebaran had crawled more than halfway around the horizon, there were again darkness and silence. When I had wakened, I was not as I had been. Upon my memory was graven the vision of the city, and within my soul had arisen another and vaguer recollection, of whose nature I was not then certain. Thereafter, on the cloudy nights when I could sleep, I saw the city often, sometimes under that horned waning moon, and sometimes under the hot yellow rays of a sun which did not set, but which wheeled low around the horizon. And on the clear nights the pole star leered as never before. Gradually I came to wonder what might be my place in that city on the strange plateau betwixt strange peaks. At first content to view the scene as an all-observant uncorporeal presence, I now desired to define my relation to it, and to speak my mind amongst the grave men who conversed each day in the public squares. I said to myself, this is no dream, for by what means can I prove the greater reality of that other life in the house of stone and brick south of the sinister swamp, and the cemetery on the low hillock where the pole star peers into my north window each night. One night, as I listened to the discourse in the large square containing many statues, I felt a change, and perceived that I had at last a bodily form. Nor was I a stranger in the streets of Olotho, which lies on the plateau of Sarkis, betwixt the peaks Noton and Kedifinek. It was my friend Alice who spoke, and his speech was one that pleased my soul, for it was the speech of a true man and patriot. That night had the news come of Dacos' fall, and of the advance of the Inutos, squat hellish yellow fiends, who 5 years ago had appeared out of the unknown west to ravage the confines of our kingdom, and finally to besiege our towns. Having taken the fortified places at the foot of the mountains, their way now lay open to the plateau, unless every citizen could resist with the strength of 10 men. For the squat creatures were mighty in the arts of war, and knew not the scruples of honor which held back our tall, gray-eyed men of Lomar from ruthless conquest. Aulus, my friend, was commander of all the forces on the plateau, and in him lay the best hope of our country. On this occasion he spoke of the perils to be faced, and exhorted the men of Olotho, bravest of the Lomarians, to sustain the traditions of their ancestors, who then forced to move southward from Zobna before the advance of the great ice sheet, even as our descendants must someday flee from the land of Lomar. Valiantly and victoriously swept aside the hairy, long-armed cannibal Nofgex that stood in their way. To me, Alas denied a warrior's part, for I was feeble and given to strange faintings when subjected to stress and hardships. But my eyes were the keenest in the city, despite the long hours I gave each day to the study of the Nakotic manuscripts and the wisdom of the Zubnarian fathers. So my friend, desiring not to doom me to inaction, rewarded me with that duty which was second to nothing in importance. To the watchtower of Thapnan he sent me, there to serve as the eyes of our army. Should the Inutos attempt to gain the citadel by the narrow pass behind the peak of Norton, and thereby surprise the garrison, I was to give the signal of fire which would warn the waiting soldiers and save the town from immediate disaster. Alone I mounted the tower, for every man of stout body was needed in the passes below. My brain was sore dazed with excitement and fatigue, for I had not slept in many days. Yet was my purpose firm, for I loved my native land of Lomar, and the marble city of Olatha that lies betwixt the peaks of Noton and Kedifinek. But as I stood in the tower's topmost chamber, I beheld the horned waning moon, red and sinister, quivering through the vapors that hovered over the distant valley of Benoff. And through an opening in the roof glittered the pale pole star, fluttering as if alive, and leering like a fiend and tempter. Methought its spirit whispered evil counsel, soothing me to traitorous somnolence with the damnable rhythmical promise which it repeated over and over. Slumber watcher till the spheres, 26,000 years have revolved, and I return to the spot where now I burn. Other stars anon shall rise to the axis of the skies, stars that soothe and stars that bless, with a sweet forgetfulness. Only when my round is o'er shall the past disturb thy door. Vainly did I struggle with my drowsiness, seeking to connect these strange words with some lore of the skies which I had learnt from the Nakotic manuscripts. My head, heavy and reeling, drooped to my breast, and when next I looked up it was in a dream, with the pole star grinning at me through a window from over the horrible swaying trees of a dream swamp, and I am still dreaming. In my shame and despair I sometimes scream frantically, begging the dream creatures around me to waken me, ere the Inutos steal up the pass behind the peak Noton and take the citadel by surprise. But these creatures are demons, for they laugh at me and tell me I am not dreaming. They mock me whilst I sleep, and whilst the squat yellow foe may be creeping silently upon us. I have failed in my duty and betrayed the marble city of Olotho. I have proven false to Alas, my friend and commander. But still these shadows of my dream deride me. They say there is no land of Lomar, save in my nocturnal imaginings, that in those realms where the pole star shines high and red, Aldebaran crawls low around the horizon. There has been naught save ice and snow for thousands of years, and never a man save squat yellow creatures blighted by the cold, whom they call Esquimaux. And as I writhe in my guilty agony, frantic to save the city whose peril every moment grows, and vainly striving to shake off this unnatural dream of a house of stone and brick, south of a sinister swamp and cemetery on a low hillock, the pole star, evil and monstrous, leers down from the black vault, winking hideously like an insane watching eye, which strives to convey some strange message, yet recalls nothing save that it once had a message to convey. Well, that story was a little bit better. I liked it a bit more. And on that note, I think that I'm going to end this stream. I know this was a short one. I need to find something other than Lovecraft to read. So tomorrow will probably be a movie. We haven't done a movie in a while. So yes, tomorrow we will do a movie and then reading something that isn't Lovecraft. So thank you for joining, those of you who are still here. It's been a good night. Sweet dreams to all of you. And I will find someone online to send you off to. Let's see who is online. Anna is online, so I am going to send you all over to see Anna. So good night. Sleep well. Why can I not get this